Hi, Malban here. I know a couple of days I said there won't be any more PiTrex videos, but I lied. I have been working on PiTrex the last couple of days and I'm hoping to have improved it again. And I'm going to summarize what I did. Probably most of the things I did are not really new stuff per se, so there are no new games or no new emulators, but I tried to remove bugs or improve things that were already there. So I hope this is a very good maintenance release. With the last released version, I had reports that on some PiTrexes or Vectrexes the output was not very good. I don't know if this changed with this release. I hope it does because I changed several things. But mainly I added configuration items that might help me or you or anyone else to better understand what's going on your Vectrex or your PiTrex, and that we can figure out then what might need to be changed so the display is equally good on your Vectrex than on any other. What you see is a introduction screen. I changed it a little bit since PiTrex is becoming better and better. I think I thought I might also improve or fancy or program a more fancy title screen, and so here we are. This is a little bouncer. Bouncing PiTrex and clipping and everything else. Yes, so it's nice to see there's no background music yet. I can probably do that, but perhaps I won't. I don't know yet. Anyway, you can go to the menu. This menu has not changed very much. It still starts with the Vectrex icon, but as you can see, there's also a possibility to go left now. Left is a settings menu. Not a menu, it's a settings. I'm going to talk about that later, or in a short while. For now, I also wanted to say the settings before were kind of getting gruesome. We had ini files for each emulator, we had settings for each emulator, and we had ini files for each collection of emulators and collection of games, and so on and so on. I threw all that away. There are no more setting files, or even if they are on your PiTrex, you can throw them away or keep them, I don't care, but they won't be read anymore. All that is left are ini files. And on this particular PiTrex that you see now, there's only one ini file, and this file is called vectrexinterface.ini. Everything is in there. But for future versions, there might still be ini files for different emulators to support different settings for these emulators in specific cases. What I also did, which was necessary for only one ini file, each emulator per default, at least on my Vectrex, displays in a more or less correct size. I know that Graham wanted to do that a long time, and he programmed an interface for that, a window interface he called. I use that with his Cinematronics emulators, and I think this Z-Blast and Hyperoids also uses it, but with the Zim emulators I didn't use it. I just inserted the correct values directly. Lazy me, but that's how I did it. Anyway, as you can see later, I will start a couple of emulators, and they all more or less have the correct settings per default. You can also always override them, but per default they should at least start with correct sizes. The settings here, if I enter the settings, then you will see a new sort of settings menu. It's in different sections. If you leave this settings menu with the button 4, it will save Vectrex interface.ini. There are more than one possible way to enter this ini file, this configuration item here, but only if you go from this place where the settings stand into the calibration, then the settings will be saved. Everything else you can change stuff, and the changed stuff also apply immediately to the program you are running at the moment, but it will not be saved. Perhaps that will change in the future. I'm not certain about that yet, but I'm still pondering that. Anyway, this screen here has a couple of features. The configuration items are displayed in the top in the middle. This configuration item here is calibration. Every item uses this slider format. You see the minimum value the calibration can have is 0, and the maximum value is 255, and I can use a joystick to change the values. For this Vectrex, this is why this Vectrex is on the one hand very good. I don't need any calibration at all. Most of my Vectrex don't need any calibration, lucky me. But anyway, you might need that. So you can see this slider has the current selected number printed on top, so you can always see what you are doing. The ever-changing, fast-changing number below the slider, this is actually the screen refresh rate, more or less. These are the Vectrex cycles needed to draw the current screen. At the moment it's something about 28,000, so it's within the 30,000 cycles limit of 50 Hertz, and so the display is very smooth, not flickering at all, and it's displaying in 50 Hertz. Below the slider, there you can see the tail gunner emblem. You can change to different vector lists here. I have a couple and one null vector list, so you can use different items for configuration to check if they all work okay or if they don't. You can change the icons with button number 2. With button number 3, if you keep button 3 pressed and move the joystick, you can move this thing, because sometimes the display is different regarding to the position of the thing on the screen. So it's sometimes important to move stuff around and look if it looks okay everywhere. On the left side of the slider, there's a PiTrex printed and an U and an N, or don't know, the symbols, whatever. I printed them precisely in that corner because this Vectrex here is my cranky Vectrex, and as you can see later, if you fiddle with these settings, the upper left corner of this Vectrex is special. The upper left corner is very cranky. I don't know if that is the case with every cranky Vectrex, but I haven't got every cranky Vectrex, so I only got this one, and well, yeah, you see that. Then with the last released version, there were some difficulties regarding string printing. So at the bottom of this display there's a string, some string like in ZBlast or so, very wise text. Anyway, this is just a text, so you can see if the text is printed okay or if it's not printed okay. So calibration, as you can see, if you change it, if your Vectrex needs calibration, then it looks something like that or something like that. So you can change these numbers till your Vectrex output is more or less straight. It is very possible that this calibration item in the future will also change, because it is probably necessary to have different calibrations for different scale factors. As of now, I only have one calibration item, but I'm thinking about adding a couple more, and so to cover different ranges with calibration values. But as of now, I have not implemented that yet. So if you go down with your joystick, you go to the next configuration item, or go up to the last configuration item. So you can scroll, so to say, through these different configuration items. Again, for the first item, you can press button 1 on any item and you get a little help. This is a help for the calibration. I'm not going to read that now. If you have time and are interested, you can read that. It's just that for each calibration item, you have a little help text to help you along, reachable via button 1, and it disappears with button 1 again, or it shows the second page if there are more than one page of help text. So calibration, if your vectors are off, then calibration can help you. Got to put on my glasses so I can read everything. So next configuration item is delay after X sample and hold. I don't think this one is needed, so I'm just going to skip it. You can change it, but as you can see, nothing much happens. You can see the refresh rate below the slider, 27,000. Usually when you change these configuration items, the frequency also changes. So this one here goes from 20,700, if I go up the way, to 28,900. So obviously a higher value is bad for a fast display. So per default, since we do not really need this setting, perhaps some backtracks need it, but I haven't seen one yet. So we keep it at 0. This is the fastest setting we have. Then we have a delay after Y sample and hold. This is a cranky thing. For this Vectrex, this is a value I must set. Set above at least 4, I think. As you can, I change it, and you will see if I do not delay after I set the Y integrators, the display is getting screwed. So I have to enter here a value till the display more or less does not change anymore with any further slides. So this is about 4. You have to test that with your Vectrex. It's all I can say. But the lower the value, the better, the faster the display. Now the display is 20,700 again. If I go lower to 0, then it's 26,300. So it's quite a lot faster. But well, if you can't display correctly, it doesn't really matter. All my other Vectrexes run okay with 0 or with 1. This Vectrex here is the only one I have that needs at least 4. Then the next one is delay via port B before setting port A. This is also a cranky thing. Can I see here a difference? No, not yet, but perhaps later I can show you something where I can see a difference. As of now, the slider itself changes very slightly. You can see that by changing this value. If there's something wrong, then it looks similar to this here. So this is distortion within a vector cluster, so to say. This is always a sign for crankiness of some sort, so I call it. Yes, then delay Y to null. This is this is still a thing, but I have implemented a workaround for the actual delay. For now, the workaround is that I think I calibrate each time if the Y value changes from a positive to a null value or something like that. It's probably not needed for every Vectrex, but for this Vectrex in special, it is needed. Otherwise, well, the display screws up if the Y integrator changes from a large positive value to 0. To 0 especially. 1 is okay, -1 is okay, but 0 is a no-go. For whatever reason. It's analog hardware which I do not understand. Then this is a maximum strength. As you may know, Vectrex vectors are drawn with two different size factors. One of the size factors is strength and the other is scale. Scale is a timing, but strength is actually the value. And this goes from 1 to 127 or to minus 128. This is an absolute value you can choose here. My cranky Vectrex again doesn't like values much larger than 90. This is why I have put a 90 in here. I can put it to 127, and you see on the way up there's already some sign of crankiness. 115, for example, this is a typical crankiness sign in the upper left corner here. You see this N sign now has a much larger right line. This is because the Y register integrator is set with consecutive two wrong numbers, so to say. There are different ways to compensate that. One is to choose a different maximum strength, and I can probably add here this delay B before A value, so it goes down again. But here you see B before A, 2 cycles is not enough, then the other one is incorrect. 3 is okay. So I can choose for my particular Vectrex if I delay a little bit longer before setting another via register, or if I choose to use different strength. And I think I can even change this with higher delay values for the Y register. These are different factors and you have to experiment with them. What's the best for your actual Vectrex? Where was I? I go here to 4 again, then I go here to 2 again and set the maximum strength to something much lower than actually needed. Again, the maximum strength, the higher the value, the faster your output will be, but it's not so terrible to go down from 120 to 90. Now we have a display rate from 28,200. If I go up to 127, okay, it's 1,000 cycles. Sounds like much, but well, I do much prefer a clean display than to lose these cycles, actually. Delay 0. This is a thing. For how long do I wait till the zeroing is settled? These are all in Vectrex cycles. 30 Vectrex cycles is a very long time, actually. You probably might not need that. The thing is, as of now, I only have one delay 0 value, and that is this one. And if you go from the furthest corner, do a zeroing into the 0 zone in the middle, then you might need 30. If you just zero for the tail gunner emblem here, for example, you probably need only 5 or 10 cycles or something like that. Sorry. So my plan is, sooner or later, this delay 0 value, I want to make it dynamic in regards to how far away from the center am I and how much actual wait cycles do I need. For now, 30 is a very okay value. there is not so very much zeroing going on. On this page there are probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I would say at most 15 zeroings going on, at most. So while you can save some cycles here, this is not a neck breaker. If you go too low, you can see within the slider here that this affects. You do not see it with the other items because the pipeline internally uses the zeroing weight for other stuff. So doing the cycles wasted here are actually put to good use within the pipeline. The slider display above here, this one is actually direct drawing to the Vectrex. It does not go through the pipeline, therefore you can see the effects here immediately. Yes, then we have a delay after T1. This is also a funny one. Usually you draw vectors with a timer 1 from the wire, but for some reason or another you are not allowed to switch the beam off directly after the timer expires. The timer expires, that means that the ramp goes to 1, so it's not ramping anymore. That means the vector beam is not moving anymore, and you should think if the vector beam is not moving anymore, then you should switch the light off immediately, otherwise you get a bright dot at the end. The funny thing is, even if timer 1 is ended, internally, for whatever reason, there seems to be some delay within the Vectrex, and the timer is the beam is still moving, or the switching off is of the light is faster than actually switching off the ramp or whatever. And this might be different for different Vectrexes. You can see the effect not very well here. Let me change one other item which I will come to later and go back here to the delay after T1. Here, then you can probably see it. If you look at the text below, no, not really. I changed too much lately to make it better. Okay, let's look at the PiTrex, the X of the PiTrex. Now we can see the one diagonal of the X is ending too early. So the X looks more like a Y at the moment, and the length of the last vector drawn, so to say, is influenced with this delay, and we have to go up till the X is fully drawn, so to say. And if you go up too high, then the last one will actually produce bright dots. So you have to choose a setting where there's still not a bright dot, but the vectors are displayed without any gaps and are displayed to the full length. Yes, I know, it's stupid, it's complicated, but it is just that. And if you have a very healthy Vectrex, then you might not need change settings at all, but if you have, then you have the means to do so. Next one, scale strength difference. This is also a funny one. I told you before that the length of a vector is calculated using two different items, the scale and the strength. So the scale can go from 1 to 255, or actually it could go up to 65,000, but you do not use this scale. This is nonsense. So typically a scale goes from 0 to 255, or even less typical, it goes from 0 to 128 or something like that. The strength, I told you, is going from 0 to 127 or from 0 to minus 128, depending where you want to go to. If you want to go up or right, then you use positive values. If you want to go left or down, you use negative values. And the factor of both is the actual, well, length of the vector. So if you have a scale of 20 and a strength of 10, then the overall length of the vector will be 300. The unit you can choose for yourself. There should be some time in it, seconds or distance or whatever. Anyway, without unit, let's say it's 300. The scale strength diff is actually a correction value to this formula, to the simple formula length of the vector equals or is the product of scale and strength, because for some reason the strength is a little bit more powerful, so to say, in this factorization than the scale. If you, or perhaps I'm stupid and I calculate everything different, but this is what it seems to me. And as you can see, the display now looks quite all right. It's a scale strength difference of 2, whatever that means. It's a formula I have programmed here, and it doesn't concern you, but the correction value is 2 for my Vectrex. If I go lower, then you see, for one thing, the smaller items get larger. And you see now a distortion, especially with the tail gunner emblem. You see that it's not correctly centered anymore. The letters reach into the rectangle and so on. So this is what it looks like if the scale strength difference is a little bit, well, off. I think for most of my Vectrex, the scale strength difference is actually always number 2. If you go too high, the display gets smaller, and as you can see, higher values also distort again. Yeah, okay, 2 it is, at least for my Vectrex. Then we have a minimum scale. This is not too complicated. The internal Vectrex interface library can use minimum and maximum values to calculate vectors. We've seen before the maximum strength used. I set it to 90. This is actually the minimum scale used, 1. I don't know if it should be changed to anything higher. You can certainly change it. The display will get slower the higher you set it. I think this is not really needed, and I put it only in there to confuse you. Pipeline type, this should not concern you either. It's not important for the immediate display. Orientation, well, that is an easy one. Here you can change the orientation of the screen. Use pipeline, yes and no. You should always use the pipeline. This is more or less just to show a difference. And here you can see I print things differently without the pipeline. And actually the values you must enter above should be different if you do not use the pipeline. But anyway, always use the pipeline. So this stays at 1. Double timer. This is not actually needed for a better display per se. I actually entered this configuration item for asteroids. The asteroids were flickering or shaking the nearer they came to the border of the screen. And that was caused by the fact that you can not factorize, so to say, the position of the asteroids, which were given in coordinates from 0 to plus minus 25,000 or something like that. And you cannot factorize these positionings to scale and strength factors that are linear, that go in straight numbers. So what I did for asteroids, and now you can figure it for everything, is for positioning purposes, I actually use two moves. I use one move to go to the approximate location and an additional fine-tuning move, so to say, to position the element on the screen absolutely correctly regarding the position in numbers from, well, I don't know, from 0 to 25,000 or minus 25,000 or something like that. And this makes it possible to have this super smooth movements you can see in the asteroids emulator. It does cost a little bit of time. In this screen here, if the timers are enabled, it's now 28,000 refresh, and without it's 27,700. It's 300. With games or programs where you only have mostly stationary data, the stationary objects on the screen, the double timer can easily be switched off. But for fast moving objects, especially if they go near the screen borders, I would switch double timer on. Keep dots ordered. Yes, this is a funny one. Within the pipeline, I can reorder vectors or display elements that I get from the actual emulator or the program running. And it makes often sense to sort the display entities for stationary objects, moving objects, or dots. And per default, dots are displayed last. This is in the thought of dots can often show as stars, which implement some scrolling effect or parallax things or whatever, and vastly moving objects always influence objects displayed later in the queue. So I try to move static objects to the first places of the pipeline, and moving objects or potentially moving objects are displayed last in the pipeline. So the default was always that dots were displayed last. There are now some emulators that use dots as stationary elements. And if they are not printed within the correct order, then they in turn do wobble because the Vectrex cannot position them as exactly if there are other elements in between. It's sort of complicated, but anyway, there is one emulator where keep dots ordered is pretty much necessary. This is SpeedFreak, and nearly all other emulators I looked at now should keep the dots not ordered, so to say. Yes, long talk about keep dots ordered. Beam off in draws. I tried to show you that before, but without any luck. I call these screen elements that are drawn more or less in with vectors that do not have any moves in between, vector clusters. So clusters of elements that are drawn one after another. Like below the letters, for example. They are often clusters of vectors. And if I can draw vector after vector without any moves in between, you can have the option to switch the beam off between these vectors or to not switch the beam off. If you switch the beam off, if you keep the beam on during the complete display, then on some backtracks or sometimes the dot in between vectors is more prominent. So if you do not like a dotted display, or if the dots are too massive, disturbing the display or something like that, you can switch this off. Off is slightly slower, but on some backtracks it does look better. But it's a matter of what we like better. Cycle equivalency. This is a PiTrex Vectrex thing. The PiTrex runs at 1 gigahertz, and the Vectrex, or the 6809 or whatever the processor of the Vectrex is, runs at 1.5 million megahertz, and this is actually the factor between the two. 666 cycles of the pi equal exactly 1 cycle of the Vectrex. And I use internal cycle counters to align both processors. Most probably you should always keep this at 666. It's a devilish number, I know, but nonetheless it's a value that is the correct one in this case. I can think of not many reasons why you should change that. Perhaps if the Vectrex exact emulation is within raster display shaking a little bit, then this can be fixed with adding 1 or 2 or subtracting 1 or 2 cycles here. This is a very fine line where one can configure differences. But you see, one of these 666 units is 1 nanosecond. A nanosecond is incredibly short time. Light travels 33 centimeters in 1 nanosecond. It's such an incredibly short time. Nonetheless, you might see a difference if used with Vectrex exact emulation. With a normal non-Vectrex exact emulation, I don't think you see much difference if you use 700 here or 600. I can change it a little bit. Now you can see the cycle equivalence string above. This is a string printed with the via shift register. There you can see a difference because this is very cycle exact thing again. But as you can see, the complete other display is not very much influenced for a very long time. I can't even read what number there is now, and you can still discern tail gunner more or less. Now we are at it. If you press button 2 and 3 at the same time, then you go to the default value. So this is sometimes faster. Button 2 and 3 together is always the default value of that configuration item you're currently displaying. Okay, cycle equivalency almost always should be kept at 666. Zero border. This is a configuration item where the pipeline chooses when to force a zero reference into its pipeline. The display goes, as I said, roughly from minus 20,000 to plus 20,000 for a full display, Vectrex display, and the default value I entered here 2,500. If different vector clusters or vectors have a move in between them which is larger than 2,500 vector units, if you want to call it that, then I do a zero ref and position the beam in U. You can play with this value. The higher it is, the faster. because it does less zeroing. But the higher it is, the more vectors are drawn in one go, and this might lead to other disturbances. If you go too low, then yeah, well, the too many zeros are actually fired, so to say, and the display slows down. So you can go. Where would you see first changes? Perhaps in the string? I don't know. Per default, the managing of these sliders, it's analog. If you go a little bit to the left, then you can see you can change single values. If you go further to the right, this is analog, and you can change faster. And you can also keep, I think it's button 2 pressed while you use the joystick. Then you go in 10 steps, so it goes much faster. So you could see down in the string here, you can see that some zeroing is happening differently. Now every word within the string is positioned from 0 again, so it looks straight again. And if I go to 0, then actually then there's a bug here. I can go below 0. I should look at that. Doesn't make much sense to go below 0. But if you go to 0, then actually each separate vector cluster will be positioned separately. This is very slow. You should not do that. Now we come to the easy values. X of that, this is just the positioning on the screen. You can change that. Here you can wrong buttons. So I'm pressing button 2 now, so it changes faster. Here you can see I can position the vectors left and right. And the next one is obviously up and down. You can position the objects up and down. Let's go to the default values again. And the last one is actually the different. You can choose the size of the display if you want to. You should probably do that also as default values again. And then there's one tiny test thing for me that will not be inserted for long there. Here you can change the actual display frequency, which I usually set at 50 Hertz, even for the emulators for now. But here you can test different frequencies, frequency as given in weight recall values as cycles. But that should not discern you. Man, how long am I talking already? 3/4 of an hour. Good luck to you listening to all of that. So this is the first part. This is actually all there is that you can configure using these new configuration items and within the settings. And if you go out of here anywhere with button number 4, then the settings are saved and loaded for the next time and for each of these emulators. The PiTrex emulators have not really changed much, so I don't go into them. VectorBlade actually had a little bug in them. I fixed it. This was a wrong bank switch that occurred, and it could actually crash. But that was an emulation issue. It was not a VectorBlade issue per se. Then we can go into step into the emulators just a little bit. This is now all these emulators I'm going to show you are running without any ini files. So these are now the default settings for the emulators, and as you can see, it looks okay. Everywhere except the PiTrex emulators, you can now enter the calibration menu and not with button 1 and 2 pressed as before, because this always disturbs some things. You have to use the joystick 2. If you enter a second joystick and press number 2, button 2, then you can enter the exact calibration menu we saw before, but within the actual game or emulator you are currently running. All controls are switched to the configuration thing, so you cannot change the game or emulation running, but the emulator or game runs in the background further, and you can actually choose within the game, while the game is being played, how to change values so that it might be displayed okay. You can also press button 1 for help, and I obviously changed some items because before this was displaying in 50 Hertz. I don't know, have to look at it. Button 1 exits again, and here button 4 exits also again, and you go back to the game. But it does not save any settings to disk or to your SD drive, but all settings are actually applied to the currently running emulator. If you actually want to retain these settings, for now you actually have to create an ini file for that special emulator and enter the values. Or do a copy of the PiTrex interface ini and change the values there and copy then whatever. This actually is more a thing if you enter this menu to see if the values that you entered within the global settings are really okay for the emulator or game currently running, and if not, then you can change the values here till they are okay and go back to the main settings, change them there so that they are applied to all emulators. Going back always for button press, asteroids looks like this. Yeah, well, you know that. Cinematronics emulator Speed Freak looks like this now. It's actually playable more or less. Before it displayed quite incorrectly, but all these display issues are very oftentimes just configuration stuff. Going out of here, armor attack, well, there's I don't think I configured that very well because there's no overlay. The size is correct, but actually you more or less can't really play it without any overlay. So yeah, going out of here. Boxing bugs, this is I think not currently working correct anyway, but it has at least the correct display size, and if I do something then I actually can start something. Oh, there's something happening. Anyway, as you can see, the display is not 100% correct. Demon is okay-ish, I think. I don't think this is emulated 100% perfect, so though it's actually playable, but I don't know if there shouldn't be some elements differently than now. So yeah. Rip off, yeah, well, just believe me, they look okay. Sundance is now configured correctly, so you can actually see all display elements. Before it was way off the screen. So Sundance looks okay. You can actually play it, even though I don't really know if I can play it. War of the Worlds is not working correctly. Barrier was displaying wrong before. It's now, I think, more or less correct, as you can see. Solar Quest, Starhawk. I changed Starhawk a little bit too. I can't remember the input settings that were changed, but right now they do not seem. I want to kill this one. Okay. Well, Warrior. Yeah, well, it's displaying okay. It's working okay. Thing is, without the overlay, you do not see where the holes are, and it's also not very good to play without the overlay. Tail Gunner. Yes, this is similar to the other Tail Gunner actually. I think that was all here. Then we are at Terry emulators, Battle Zone. This is probably the next emulator I'm tackling. As you can see, the screen wobbles a little bit. The blinking above is distorting the screen. One of the score elements is actually more or less wrongly displayed, but I think the next emulator I'm going to try to beautify will be this one. Black Widow, well, Black Widow displays so many vectors while playing. This is actually very I haven't actually my second joystick here, so I cannot play it. It's played with two joysticks. Red Baron. With Red Baron I did one thing, because it was displaying sometimes things way out of the screen. Black Baron is one of the emulators where I actually do a screen clipping now. It looks much better, and the vectors are cut off at the screen edge, and all the other vectors are displaying much cleaner also, because they do not get distorted from these huge vectors. It's well, I don't like playing it, but it looks okay. Lunar Lander, same thing. Here I also added a screen clipping, and as you can see, the size is correct. I'm just waiting for the lander to drop, then you can see the scrolling. It looks quite smooth now, not so choppy as before. This is in relation to the actual clipping of the screen. Well, yeah, now you can see the smooth scrolling to the sides, but this emulator can also be much beautified. I think there are huge numbers of vectors displayed here. I think there are 400, 500 or 600 or something like that. It's enormous vector display for the status things alone. There, I have to look at how that can be made much more effective. Gravitar, same thing. Actually configured the correct size, and I think for the planetary part I also added screen clipping, because vectors were getting distortioned. Yeah, I'm not going to play them, I'm just going to load them. Space Duel. This is actually a very nice game. Last time I played it a little bit. It's looking very good now, and displaying very smoothly. I think this one greatly also benefits from the thing I said, this double time thing, because the vectors are moving so very smooth now. It looks, I just like it. It looks really great. Tempest, yeah, Tempest is always a gives me sorrow, because there are so many vectors on here. It's nice that it's actually runnable, but I don't know if I can actually really get it well playable, because there are so many vectors on screen. And I have to think of some fantastic features so this will actually be playing smoothly, and that the vectors are not distortioned in the middle of the game. Yeah, but anyway, it's working. Asteroids, not static binary translation. Actually, we should throw this out. At the moment, this one is actually crashing. But I leave it in because it's a very good test case for the actual emulator. It should not be crashing. So there's still something wrong within the emulator, and this is the main reason I left it in. Asteroids Deluxe, more or less the same thing. This one actually works, but the actual asteroids are distorted, and I don't think this is a PiTrex interface thing. I think there's also some emulation still going wrong. I don't know what, and I have not actually looked at it, but both asteroids from the Sim emulator are not really, well, looking that good. So you should not really play them. Then there are Z-Blast. This you can also use to configure, because some people said that the writings were not displayed correctly. Again, joystick number 2, button number 2. Here you see the whole menu of things you can change and try for correct settings. If you do not reach correct settings, please tell me, then I have to think of new strategies. I don't know what else to say. And I think we haven't got it on video yet. Hyperoids is also a game from Linux that was ported by Kevin to the PiTrex, to this PiTrex library, and somehow I can move. Game over. This was really fast. If you go up with the joystick, then you move forward. If you go down with the joystick, you go backward. You have lives, you have shields, and you have bombs. You have extras you can collect. There are hunters coming which are going to shoot at you, and so on. It's a game similar to Asteroids, but well, not quite the same. Actually, also nice looking game. Yes. So now this was the actual PiTrex stuff. I thought I was going also to do a thing on the Mac to show you the ini files and the settings, but I talked for about an hour now, and you are probably not okay with listening to more ramblings, so I'm going to call it a day. More or less, I'm just looking at my list here, what I've done and what I've changed. I don't know if I mentioned everything, so I'm going through it again. Vector blade was corrected. I added an additional config item to the battle zone ini file to support a different set of controllers. I'm going to write that down in some text so you can see it. Removed all ini files for the Cinematronics stuff. Removed all setting files. Ini files from the actual PiTrex interface are now saved as ini files, not as binary files anymore. I unified the sizes of the emulators. I removed all old calibrations. I added the new calibration menu as mentioned, joystick number 2, button number 2. I fixed a couple of bugs within the actual pipeline display, so it might be possible that this one is working out of the box for you. Actually, I hope it. If not, I will be disappointed, so please display fine. Yeah, that's among other things stuff I did. Actually, it was one hell of a ride. I think I programmed for this release at least 30 or 40 hours. I'm quite fine with this one, but I hope it works out as well as I think that it should. Have much fun with it, and well, have a nice day. Thank you if you really listened all through this ramblings. Goodbye.